There was a point today when Kyle Jamieson was chasing a Ravi Jadeja cut shot out to the boundary. And for a second he thought, oh, I might be able to dive at this. And then he realised he was a bit too late. And so he just kept running and he just launched himself over the boundary hoarding.
This is the last block. It's almost as good as a Minecraft video. Imagine that.
Kyle Jamieson is an incredible physical specimen. For someone like him, it's just about really finding the sport that he can excel at. At his height, basketball, rugby, tennis, volleyball are all very, very valid options. And he might have chosen cricket regardless, because he might just like cricket. But in the amateur era, another sport that had money may have poached him. And even if he had chosen cricket, in an amateur environment, there is no guarantee that Jamieson would have been able to turn himself from a promising young batter into perhaps the most complete bowler in tests today. That takes a full-time investment in his career, coaches, facilities, A-tours, diet, analysis, all those fun things. Kyle Jamieson is very much a product of what New Zealand cricket is now. And he came into this series averaging just over 14. Many people pointed to the fact that he'd only bowled in New Zealand and England, which is true. It's also true that despite favourable pitches and home pitches, almost no bowlers in the history of game average 14 from their first 8 matches. It's not a normal thing to do. This is not an ordinary bowler. And in his first test outside the cloudy environment, he showed how skillful he is. Tall bowlers rarely swing the ball. Tall bowlers aren't usually this fast. Having a decent pace while moving the ball both ways is almost the ideal test bowler if you are really tall. Not to mention that he is also very smart, the way he uses the crease, the way he moves the ball around. He is a consistent threat on bounce or sideways movement, and his release is so high that there is no proper way to prepare for him. And if you look at his wickets today, you can see these skills in play. Jamieson's first wicket was the one that moved away, and it was a ball on a tricky length. Mayank Agarwal was trapped between defensive and a push for the run, and it took the outside edge. The ball to Shubman Gill came back in, with the ball fading a little bit, probably before we saw any genuine reverse. And Jamieson somehow got it to move back in, take the inside edge, and it was a very full ball, the sort that are a bit floaty from bowlers usually of Jamieson's height. But his strong wrist and decent pace mean his full balls are far more dangerous than usual, and he exploded Gill's stumps. The ball to dismiss Ajinkya Rahane was maybe not as important as some of the ones earlier that had pitched basically in the same place and bounced quite high, especially for this wicket. And then Rahane got pretty much the same ball this time, and it bounced less and came back in again. That's 3 wickets moving out, moving in, and with bounce and height as an issue. He won't always have days like this, especially in Asia, but it shows that this isn't just a flash in the pan. This is what Kyle Jamieson is, an incredible professional bowler. There was another point today where Will Somerville had to chase a ball out to the boundary, and he did it a little bit like a middle-aged accountant in a club game. And Will Somerville is a middle-aged accountant. His journey to New Zealand team is very fascinating. He's had the kind of career that office-working club cricketers sort of dream of. Just being used when you needed, not playing that much, just coming in, disappearing, and living a full life outside of cricket as well. And his journey to the New Zealand team is almost that fascinating. He's born in New Zealand, but schooled and raised for a long time in Australia before heading back to New Zealand for university. He did this as a regular Joe. He wasn't like a potential test player almost at any point. And in a 16-year first-class career, he's now playing his 38th match. And even many of those have been quite weird. He played a couple in New Zealand for Otago in 2006. And side note, that is just 4 years after New Zealand domestic players went on strike. Although as Ian O'Brien and others have said, it's hard to call it a strike if you weren't getting paid in the first place. But Somerville played one more match for Otago in 2008. Then his 4th match was for New South Wales, where he played sporadically over the next few years for 12 matches. Then in 2018, he came back to Auckland, played a couple of matches, and then was straight in the test team a few months later. This is not a career of a modern professional cricketer. This is the kind of thing you saw back in the amateur days. He travels for work, he travels for study, his career starts and fizzles, and he pops back up home and then suddenly he's in the test team. Somerville is not a bad bowler. At 193 centimetres, he has a good advantage over other spinners, and he has good momentum through the crease, and he varies his release a lot. But so far they've only used him for away tests, and while that's more common for Western spinners, it's still a bit of a weird career. It also gets odder, as most of his success so far has been bowling with the newer ball. That might be because he gets good drift, and when the ball is harder, it suits him as a taller bowler. One thing he does do is he's very economical. For long stints today, he was going at around 2 runs and over. His accuracy and height mean that batters struggle to score off him quickly. And from his limited overs over the last few years, his economy is just very good. But today, Somerville didn't get any wickets. he's a very handy bowler to have as your backup. Perhaps had he been identified by New Zealand cricket at a young age and made cricket his main profession and developed that way instead of randomly across both sides of the Tasman, he'd be a more dynamic test bowler right now. The closest he got to a wicket today was probably a DRS LBW that went against him when Shreyas Iyer played across a straight one. Mostly Somerville gave New Zealand some control and allowed the other bowlers to attack a bit more. It was needed as Tim Southee was injured for a period and Ajaz Patel struggled with line and length at times. And Rachin Ravindra showed some talent and also why he has a first-class bowling average of 50. You could argue that Somerville's never going to be a great test bowler, fairly convincingly. He's 37 and he's only played a handful of matches. But there's obviously some talent there, even if we haven't seen much of it at the test level. Even the fact that he's been able to play first-class cricket in 2 countries. Yet even if he is limited, he has a purpose and a worth within this team. But what I saw today really was a weird mix of the past and the future of New Zealand cricket. Somerville completely represents that amateur era that New Zealand is trying to move on from, where obviously talented players would maximise their abilities on their own and end up as solid internationals if New Zealand was lucky. And then you have Jamieson, where New Zealand cricket can take a late bloomer with physical strengths and turn them into one of the best bowlers in the world.